Once all the wires have been cut to length and properly stripped, the next step is to solder them. And if you are not familiar with the soldering process, I would strongly recommend watching some tutorials online and also practicing before doing any soldering on your thermocouples. The thermocouples themselves are also quite complex, so then I would also recommend getting familiar on how they work. Now, since the thermocouples are so small, as you can see, one of the main challenges is to make sure they are always at the right distance. One way that has worked for me is using a soldering guide, which is nothing but a piece of aluminum that I got from one of these blades. And since the wires are so small and the camera might not be able to show the details, I have here a constant wire, and it's 3 pieces of copper that I can use to show you how this soldering guide works and also how I use it. The first thing I do is to solder the one on the end, and for this one the guide is not absolutely necessary, of course. What I do first is to make sure that both the copper and the constant wires are aligned, and then I apply a small amount of soldering flux. Then I proceed to solder the junction. Now, because the wires I'm using are bigger, it takes a little longer for them to get to the melting point temperature of the solder. With the smaller wires, of course, this happens almost immediately. The next step is to align the first junction and then align the second wire to the desired position and proceed to solder. Of course, I'm using larger wires, so the length of the junction is much wider. So again, I'll apply a small amount of solder and proceed to solder. Then we simply repeat the process, making sure the first 2 junctions are properly aligned to our desired positions. Now I'm going to repeat the process using the wires I'm actually using for my thermocouples. And if the information is important for someone, I'm using a Weller soldering station WES51, and for this wires I usually keep it at 550 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 290 degrees Celsius, I believe. So again, as you can see, the first and the second thermocouples are properly aligned. Once these two are aligned, then I proceed to solder the third one. Alright, well, there you have it. That's how I use my guide, which I forgot to mention, but it's 225 millimeters, and the distance between the first and the second, as well as from the second to the third, is 12.5 millimeters. There's of course a margin of error, but at least using this guide, I believe, is kept constant. And one important detail is to remember to clean all the thermocouples if you are using acidic soldering flux. If you're using rosin